Hi, everybody. Welcome to Dan on Sports. Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, making some interesting statements on a recent Dan Patrick show. And he's using baseball as reasons why the NBA might want to consider some rules changes. And we're talking about some dramatic rules changes. Now, let's qualify by saying Silver did not automatically say he wants to see the rules changed. He's just making some suggestions, some hints. Like what, for example? Like shortening the game by 8 minutes, going to 10-minute quarters rather than the 12-minute quarters they've had since forever. I mean, since I began following the NBA, they play 12-minute quarters. But he is suggesting 10-minute quarters. In fact, he said, quote, because the game is so global, one of the things we'd like to see over time is to create a more consistent set of rules globally around the game. Now, this is important because the NBA has such an international flavor. You cannot imagine, particularly from a betting standpoint, you cannot imagine how popular the NBA is around the world. It is huge, absolutely huge. But anyway, one of the reasons he would like to go to 10-minute quarters is because that's the way it is from an international standpoint. He also listed a couple of other reasons, and I think they're very valid. For example, he talked about putting aside what it would mean for records and things like that. I think that a 2-hour format for a game is more consistent for modern television habits. I don't think most fans would be disappointed if it was a 2-hour presentation. In other words, what he is saying is it would take 2 hours to play an NBA game of 4 10-minute quarters. Obviously, you've got halftime. You've got to factor in a timeout or two or three or four or five. You've got to factor in the remaining 2 minutes of a game. Obviously, television commercials. But what he is saying is you go to 10-minute quarters. If you go to 10-minute quarters, you would have a game on TV for 2 hours, and boom, that's it. And he also states it would help as far as some of these star players who get benched or who sit out games because it's such a long season. I've always advocated, by the way, fewer games that the NBA play and maybe expand the playoffs a bit more, but that's not going to happen because that means money. So, what he is suggesting, in order to keep these players fresh and enable them to play more games in an 82-game season, and remember, you've got to play something like 65 games in order to qualify for certain awards now, play 65 of the 82 games, barring a serious injury. What he is saying is you keep these players fresh by going to 4 10-minute quarters. I like it. So far, I like everything he's talking about. Now, once more, to emphasize, he's not saying this must happen. I'm pushing for this. He's just throwing out some suggestions. And then he uses baseball as the reason these should take place. He says, I'm a fan of what baseball did. Remember what baseball did? They added a pitch clock and they enforced the pitch clock rule. Remember what also they did? Batters as far as stepping out of the box and all of that stuff. I still think baseball should tweak that a bit more. I've got some suggestions on baseball, by the way, what they can do to really make the game even better. I'll save that for another day. But let's go back to what Silver is saying. I'm a fan of what baseball did. I'm a baseball fan. And I think some of those changes have really increased the engagement and the entertainment value of the game. No question about it. No question. And he's using baseball, the national pastime, based in tradition, as an example of if baseball did it, we can do it too. You know what Silver is trying to bring out, and I think he's right on the money as far as perhaps suggesting these changes. I'd love to see him adopted, by the way. Hey, the men's game is two 20-minute halves in college basketball, and the women in college basketball play 4 10-minute periods. 10-minute periods is the way to go, even at the NBA level. But anyway, one of the reasons he keeps emphasizing that 2-hour window is because we now have a short attention span. And you hear about, well, the younger generation, Generation X, Generation Z, they have a shorter retention span. Hey, I'm a baby boomer. I have a shorter retention span. I mean, these games that go on forever and ever, whether you're talking baseball, basketball, or even football. I mean, college football has a big issue with the length of games. I mean, some of these college football games are going nearly 4 hours, and they get great ratings. There's not much of a big emphasis on shortening the time of a college football game. And in this case, I'm not saying reduce the time in a quarter when it comes to college football or the NFL. I'm saying the pace of play. You've got to address the pace of play. I know they have clocks. You've got to get 35 seconds before you launch a play, et cetera, but they could pick it up a bit more. For example, stopping the clock after a first down in college football, you've got to address that issue. You've got to cut down on how long it takes to review a play when you go to the videotape to look at the replay. And like I said, I'm a baby boomer. And these games are going on and on and on. By the way, did you see where the NCAA men's college basketball championship game, the championship game, which always is on a Monday night, always used to start at 9:20 p.m. Eastern Time? They've moved that up to 8:50 p.m. starting this season. What does that tell you? And what Silver is pointing out, you get it into that 2-hour window, you're going to have an even better product. Make the game last 2 hours. Now, football, as I said, the NFL game, most NFL games go about 3 hours and change. Some get in under 3 hours. College football, they always go beyond 3 hours. But they continue to get great ratings. And those games are more epic because you play fewer games, one a week. In some cases, one every other week because you have to throw in a couple of bye weeks. But when you're talking baseball, when you're talking football, when you're talking baseball and you're talking basketball, and for that matter, even hockey, although the hockey games move pretty quickly, the 3 periods. But when you're talking about sports that have lengthy seasons as far as the number of games, baseball, the 162-game season, the NBA, an 82-game season. What's the NHL, also 82 games? When you play that many games, you have got to somehow fit it into a 2-hour window because our attention span for sports has changed and has shortened. My goodness, is there anything more boring than foul, go to the foul line, foul, go to the foul line, and an NBA game drags on for 2.5 and sometimes 2 hours and 45 minutes. Silver's onto something, and he used baseball as an example. And what is he onto? The fact you've got to address this issue because our lifestyles have changed. Sports is big. Sports is enormous. We know all of that for sure. However, there does come a time when people, even the ardent sports fan, says, man, these games are just dragging on. You can play an NBA game in 2 hours. You've got a product that's going to be outstanding. Good for the commissioner to just suggest it, just a hint. He said it on the Dan Patrick Show, and he used baseball as an example as to why the NBA should consider change. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing to the podcast. And you can also subscribe to my newsletter, and you can do that by going to sportscasterdan.com.